Let me ask you something. Have you ever stared at your fish finder, seen that perfect-looking deep hole on the bottom and thought, that's it, that's where the big ones are hiding? We've all been there. Now, what if I told you that you were probably casting into the coldest, darkest, most lifeless spot on the entire lake? Today, we're going to tear apart one of the biggest myths in fishing, the legend of the perfect deep hole. I'm going to show you exactly why that spot you've been targeting for years might be a complete waste of time, and how a simple understanding of water can completely revolutionize your catch rate. This is the hidden reason so many anglers go home empty-handed, even when their electronics are screaming, "Fish here." Do you believe every deep hole is a guaranteed honey hole? Let me know in the comments right now. I have a feeling some minds are about to be changed. For generations, the advice has been the same. Go deep. When the sun is high and hot, go deep. When the weather gets cold and nasty, go deep. It's been drilled into our heads by granddads, uncles, and every fishing magazine from the last 50 years. We see a sharp drop-off on a map, or a deep basin on the sonar screen, and our angler brain lights up. It just feels right, doesn't it? It feels like structure. It feels safe. It feels like exactly where a big, lazy lunker would want to hang out and avoid the chaos. And look, sometimes that's absolutely true, but a whole lot of the time we're just following an old tradition without asking the single most important question you can ask. Can a fish actually live down there right now? Let's start with why we're so drawn to these spots in the first place. The appeal of a deep hole is almost primal for a fisherman. We see it as the ultimate refuge. It offers protection from birds of prey, from the sun's harsh rays, and from the boat traffic up on the surface. We imagine a whole ecosystem down there with big fish lurking in the shadows, waiting to ambush smaller prey. In our minds, it's a stable, unchanging environment, a safe house where the giants of the lake reside. This idea is so powerful that we often ignore all the other signs the lake is giving us, and will sit over that one spot for hours, convinced that patience is the only thing separating us from the fish of a lifetime. That's the power of the deep hole myth. Now let's get into the reality, and it starts with a concept you might have heard of, but maybe never fully explored: lake stratification. Put simply, in many lakes, the water separates into layers, and these layers don't mix. Think of it like a bottle of oil and vinegar salad dressing after it's been sitting for a while. You get distinct layers. The sun beats down on the lake all spring and summer, warming up the top layer of water. But that warmth doesn't penetrate all the way to the bottom, so you end up with a warm, comfortable layer on top and a cold, dark, stagnant layer on the bottom. These are not just slightly different, they can be like two completely different worlds, separated by an invisible boundary. This process creates three distinct zones in the lake. The top, warm, sunlit layer is called the epilimnial. This is where most of the life happens. It's rich in oxygen because of wind action on the surface, and because plants and algae are producing it through photosynthesis. Below that you have the hypolimnion. This is the deep, cold bottom layer that never sees the sun and doesn't get any new oxygen from the surface. It's essentially sealed off from the world above. And in between these two layers is the most important zone for us anglers, a thin band of water where the temperature drops rapidly. This transition zone is called the thermocline, or metalimnion, and it is the key to everything. So why is this thermocline so darn important? Think of it as the lake's invisible floor. For fish, it's a comfort zone. The water above it might be too warm, especially in the middle of summer. The water below it, as we'll find out, is often unlivable. The thermocline itself offers a perfect combination of cooler temperatures and, crucially, sufficient oxygen. It acts like a magnet for baitfish, which then attracts the predator fish we're all trying to catch. Bass, walleye, trout, you name it, they will often suspend right on or just above this invisible ledge. They treat it just like a physical piece of structure, like a weed line or a rock pile. It's their highway and their dining room. You can actually see this on a good fish finder. It's not always a sharp, perfect line, but you can learn to spot it. First, you need to turn up the sensitivity or the gain on your unit. You're looking for a faint, fuzzy band of clutter that stretches across the screen at a certain depth. It might look like a light haze or a collection of tiny specks. That's it. That's the thermocline. It's the boundary where the water density changes. Sometimes you'll see arches, the fish, stacked up right on top of that fuzzy line. When you see that, you've found the gold mine. You've stopped guessing and started seeing the lake for what it really is, a layered world with fish living at very specific depths. Now we get to the heart of the problem, the reason your perfect, deep hole is a trap. It all comes down to one thing, oxygen, or rather a lack of it. That bottom layer, the hyperlimnion, is completely cut off from the oxygen-producing world above. But down on the lake bottom, there's a ton of stuff happening. Dead leaves, algae, and all sorts of organic matter sink to the bottom and begin to decompose. That process of decay consumes a mass. By midsummer in many lakes, this deep, cold water can become what's called anoxic or hypoxic. That's a fancy way of saying it has very little or even zero breathable oxygen. A fish that swims down into that layer is like a human walking into a room with no air. It can't survive. It doesn't matter how great the structure looks or how many crayfish are crawling on the bottom. If a fish can't breathe there, it simply won't be there. Period. So you can sit there with the best bait in the world, casting into that 30, 40 or 50-foot hole, and you might as well be casting onto a parking lot. There is nothing alive down there to bite it. Think about it from the fish's perspective. It has a choice. It can be up in the warm surface water where there's plenty of oxygen, but the temperature might be uncomfortably hot, or it can go down into the deep where the temperature is perfect, but there's no oxygen to breathe. So what does it do? It compromises. It finds that sweet spot, that thin layer of the thermocline where the water is cool enough and has enough oxygen. That is its entire world. The fish are trapped in this zone. They will follow it around the lake, relating to structure that intersects with that specific depth. This is not a preference. It is a biological necessity. This creates a scenario that fools thousands of anglers. Your fish finder is marking the bottom of that deep hole perfectly. It shows a beautiful piece of structure, maybe a sunken tree or a rock pile. It looks like the fishiest spot you've ever seen. But your screen is empty of fish arches, or worse, sometimes your electronics might even mark false signals or ghosts in the low oxygen water that look like fish, tricking you into staying. You spend all your time focused on the bottom, while the real action, the entire population of catchable fish, is suspended 20 feet above your lure, completely out of reach and completely out of your mind. It's the ultimate fishing illusion. And this isn't just a summer phenomenon. A similar thing can happen in the winter, under the ice, especially in lakes with a lot of snow cover. The snow blocks sunlight so the underwater plants die off and stop producing oxygen. Meanwhile, the decomposition on the bottom continues to chew up the available oxygen all winter long. The ice acts as a cap, just like the warm surface water in the summer, preventing any new oxygen from getting in. This can again create deep zones that are completely devoid of life. The fish are forced into shallower water or suspended higher in the water column, where the last remaining pockets of oxygen exist. So, does this mean you should never fish deep holes again? Absolutely not. It means you need to know when to fish them. The game changes completely during two specific times of the year, the spring and fall turnovers. As the surface water in the fall cools down to match the temperature of the deep water, the density becomes uniform. A good, strong wind can then mix the entire lake from top to bottom. It's a massive reset button. All that oxygen-rich surface water gets pushed down, and the nutrient-rich bottom water gets pulled up. The entire lake becomes one consistent, oxygenated environment. This turnover is a magical time for deep water fishing. Suddenly that deep hole that was a dead zone all summer is now full of oxygen and life. Fish are free to roam anywhere they please, and they will absolutely move into those deep holes to feast on insects and bait fish that are now thriving there. The same thing happens in reverse in the spring. The ice melts, the sun warms the cold surface water, and when it reaches a certain temperature, usually around 39 degrees Fahrenheit for fresh water, the lake mixes again. These turnover periods are the prime time to put those deep hole theories to the test, because for a few weeks they are absolutely the place to be. It's also important to understand that not all lakes are created equal. This whole stratification and dead zone phenomenon is most common in fertile, relatively shallow lakes and ponds, the kind most of us fish. However, very deep, clear, cold, and infertile lakes, think of a classic trout lake in the mountains, might not stratify as strongly. They have less organic matter on the bottom to consume oxygen, so the deep water can remain habitable year-round. Similarly, reservoirs with a constant current or rivers are a completely different ballgame. The moving water is constantly mixing and reoxygenating, so you don't typically get these stagnant dead zones. So how do you use this information to catch more fish right now? You have to make a mental shift. Stop thinking about fishing the bottom. Start thinking about fishing the zone. Once you identify the depth of the thermocline on your electronics, that becomes your new target. Your entire focus should be on finding structure that intersects with, or comes close to, that specific depth. A long tapering point that flattens out at 25 feet. If the thermocline is at 25 feet, that's your spot. A sunken island that tops out at 30 feet when the thermocline is at 30. That's the honey hole, not the 90-foot basin next to it. This changes the way you approach your lure selection as well. If the fish are suspended at, say, 28 feet over 50 feet of water, a bottom-bouncing jig is completely useless. This is where techniques like drop-shotting shine, because you can hold your bait precisely at that magic depth. It's why deep-diving crankbaits that run at a specific depth can be so effective. You're not trying to hit the bottom, you're trying to swim your lure right through their living room. Trolling with downriggers, using suspending jerkbaits, or even just counting down a swim bait to the right depth become your primary weapons. Let's walk through a classic summer scenario. You pull up to a main lake point that drops from 10 feet down into a 60-foot hole. The old you would have positioned the boat over the deep water and cast up onto the point, dragging your worm or jig down the drop. The new you does something different. You idle over the area first, watching your sonar. You see the thermocline is sitting at 22 feet. You also see a few bait balls and some big arches suspended right at that 20 to 25 foot depth. Now you know the fish aren't on the bottom, they're not even on the shallow part of the point. They are holding on the edge of the drop-off right where it hits that magic 22-foot mark. Now you can fish with purpose. You position your boat so you can cast parallel to the bank, keeping your lure in that 20 to 25-foot strike zone for the entire retrieve. You're no longer wasting 90% of your cast on dead water. You are now presenting your bait exactly where the fish are living and breathing. This is the difference between a frustrating day of casting and a day where you feel like you have a secret code that unlocks the lake. It's a massive confidence booster because you're not just hoping for a bite. You are targeting fish you know are there. One of the biggest mistakes anglers make is trusting their map more than their electronics. You might have a waypoint saved on your GPS labeled Big Fish Hole. You've caught fish there before, maybe during the spring or fall, so you keep going back in the middle of August and you blank. It's not because the fish have left forever, it's because the conditions have changed. The spot is still good, but the fish are now suspended 30 feet above the waypoint. You have to be willing to adapt. You have to trust what your sonar is telling you about today, not what your memory is telling you about last October. This knowledge also helps you eliminate water incredibly fast. Instead of fishing every piece of deep structure you come across, you can now focus only on the ones that are relevant to the thermocline depth. You can look at a lake map before you even launch your boat and highlight all the areas where the bottom depth is in that sweet spot. You can completely ignore all the water that's significantly deeper or shallower. This makes you a vastly more efficient angler. You spend less time searching and more time with your lure in front of active, catchable fish. It's the closest thing to a shortcut that exists in fishing. So, the next time you're on the water, I challenge you to do this. Before you make a single cast on your favorite deep spot, spend 5 minutes idling over it. Find the thermocline, look for the suspended bait and the arches. Ask yourself, where are the fish actually living right now? Forget what you think you know about the spot. Let the lake itself tell you where to fish. The answer might surprise you. That perfect deep hole might be a desert, but the invisible oasis floating just above it is where you'll find the fish you've been looking for all along. So to wrap it all up, that perfect deep hole you've been putting on a pedestal for years, for most of the summer and a good part of the winter, it isn't a sanctuary for fish. It's a cold, oxygen-starved desert. The real magic, the real life isn't happening on the bottom of the lake, but in that middle layer, the thermocline, where temperature and oxygen create the only habitable zone. The biggest shift in your fishing will come when you stop looking at depth as just a number and start seeing the lake as a living, three-dimensional world with layers. The fish aren't on the bottom of the hole, they're living on an invisible ledge maybe 50 feet above it. That right there is the game changer. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this. I know it's a lot to take in, but I absolutely promise it will make you a better, more thoughtful angler. If this blew your mind a little bit, do me a huge favor and hit that like button and be sure to subscribe for more myth-busting fishing content. And now I really want to hear from you. Has this ever happened to you? Have you marked a spot that looked perfect but produced nothing? After watching this, what are you going to do differently on your next trip out? Let's talk about it in the comments below.